There's a very specific rhythm to the fall for me, and it happens every year, and it's both subtle, but I've also come to notice it. I'll notice some green leaves start to turn a little bit yellow somewhere in late July or early August. I know that sounds crazy, but I think the unhealthy trees maybe turn just a little bit earlier. Maybe they've been turning earlier because every year we spend all summer covered in smoke from wildfires in Canada every year. And so maybe the trees are like, oh, well, we're getting less light. Maybe it's time to change a little early. I don't know what's going on there. But you start to see a little bit of change, late July, early August. And then you get one night later on into August where it's like, oh, dang, I need a sweatshirt. There's a little bit of a crisp in the air. And then you start seeing just the rhythm of kids going back to school and that sort of weekly schedule happening. And then you get into somewhere in early or mid-October, the aspen leaves have all changed. They're bright and vibrant. And you go out one night and you're like, dang, sweatshirt's not getting it done anymore. I need my real coat. My breath is freezing. Or maybe there's a little bit of steam rolling off of the pavement and a bunch of the leaves are gone. And so the trees are starting to look they're down to their skeletons, and you just feel it. This is spooky. It's Halloween season. That's the rhythm we're in. And then after that, it gets a little colder yet, and everything where I live browns out. Everything gets harvested, and that tells a story about, hey, we are now into Thanksgiving season. Just boom, 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 one after the next. But each of those things is a celebration of something very different. You're talking about celebrating the kids and school and college football and that sort of it's time to go learn time of year. That's what September's about. You're talking about celebrating, if you will, the cycles of life and death and mortality. Maybe that sounds a little dark, but it's what we commemorate there. And then you commemorate gratitude after you commemorate death and mortality. And that's the way our cycle of things works. It sounds kind of weird when you talk about that all being stacked on top of each other, but it's not that weird. Other cultures stack a bunch of ideas right next to each other in successive holidays as well. And indeed, that was the case for the fall season in ancient Israel with this series of holidays that were enacted all the way going back to the time of Moses. So you and I are working on Nehemiah right now. It's like 800 or 1,000 years before the stuff that we're looking at in the book of Nehemiah. So these are very old holidays by the time we get to the stuff we're looking at in Nehemiah chapter 8. And no doubt, over 1,000 years, these rhythms were very much baked into how people conceived of their year and thought about their fall and all of this business. Well, one of these holidays that had sort of fallen out of vogue is syncing up, just happens to coincide with this big festival, this big renewing of the covenant that's happening in Nehemiah chapter 8. And the timing on it, it's providential. It's amazing how well it works. And the people begin to celebrate this with joy in Nehemiah 8:12. And then on into 13, we find out that they had forgotten what some of this part of the rhythm of their fall means. And they are all simultaneously becoming refamiliarized with it. And it proves to be very life-giving. It goes like this. Nehemiah 8:13. On the second day of the month, the heads of all the families, along with the priests and the Levites, gathered around Ezra the scribe to give attention to the words of the law. Now, we've been talking about September 27th, 444 BC being the date that all of this is happening. And it's a little bit confusing because in Nehemiah 8:13, where it says on the second day of the month, that doesn't correspond to September or October. We're talking about the Hebrew calendar and kind of laying our modern calendar over the top. I'd have to do mental math on how it all lines up, and I'm not going to do it. It's all roughly in this time of year in the fall season. So on the second day, they all gathered around Ezra the scribe to give attention to the words of the law. They found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded through Moses, that the Israelites were to live in booths during the feast of the 7th month, and that they should proclaim this word and spread it throughout their towns and in Jerusalem. Quote, go out into the hill country and bring back branches from olive and wild olive trees and from myrtles and palms and shade trees to make booths, as it is written. And apparently all the people were like, I maybe vaguely remembered that was a thing. I've seen some of the really orthodox people who are really into it, the tryhards, do things with little huts or something along the way, but I guess that isn't really a thing that we commemorate anymore. But now they're learning all of this stuff from the law, and they get to the part in the law where this is all laid out, and there's sort of a simultaneous, dang, well, that's actually kind of cool. This sounds like a great celebration, and we are in celebration mode anyway. It's sort of the plot of every Christmas movie ever, that's happening here, where people get busy and mom and dad are maybe going to get a divorce because he has to go to the corporate business job work to go to corporate synergy business meetings, and he has to be on a Zoom to do his business, and she has to run around with all the kids and keep them busy. And I guess they just kind of forgot about the really important things. But through a series of hilarious mishaps and misunderstandings and hijinks, they rediscover the meaning of Christmas, and they decide not to get a divorce, and everything works out, and they have a really good time. And you, dear viewer, should also remember the meaning of Christmas. And it's saccharine, and it's vague, and it's silly, and they always kind of skip over the Jesus stuff, which I think does have something to do with Christmas. This is sort of what this is, except it's real and sincere and widespread and not forced and not a giant cash grab. This is real. They all rediscovered the meaning of the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles all at once. It's kind of awesome. Okay, well, what is the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, I looked that up, and I could just go to the other part of the Bible where they talk about this. We're going to Leviticus 23. And if you, from time to time when you listen to this, if you get a Bible out and you look at some of these passages along with me, you don't have to. I try to always read it to you. But if you do that, you got the kids with you, I don't know, you might want to kind of put a hand over chapter 20 and 22, because let me tell you, that gets into some of the real gritty. You got to be careful with Leviticus. There are phrases in here, and some of them, it's all Bible. I think it's all very good. It's all very important. Maybe we'll do Leviticus someday. It'll probably be a while. But if we do, there's going to be a lot of content warnings on that, because there's a lot of stuff about, well, it's about stuff. Feast of Tabernacles, Leviticus 23. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's Feast of Tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days. The first day is a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. And for 7 days, present offerings made to the Lord by fire. And on the 8th day, hold a sacred assembly and present an offering made to the Lord by fire. It is the closing assembly. Do no regular work. Now this next part's a parenthetical. These are the Lord's appointed feasts, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for bringing offerings made to the Lord by fire, the burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings required for each day. These offerings are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbaths, and in addition to your gifts and whatever you have vowed, and all the freewill offerings you give to the Lord. Close parenthetical. So, beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of rest, and the 8th day is also a day of rest. On the first day, you are to take choice fruit from the trees and palm fronds, leafy branches and poplars, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Live in booths for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in booths, so your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses announced to the Israelites the appointed feasts of the Lord. All right, well, it seems like there's a lot going on there, but it's not terribly complicated. This is a celebratory vibe, right? This is time to reflect on great things that God did in the past, to express gratitude and thanksgiving for what God has done. It's also a time to eat good things and drink good beverages, and it's supposed to be into perpetuity. This is supposed to go on forever. This is a way of keeping the continuity of this story in place. Now, this is kind of a pain in the butt for everybody to go out and get all this stuff and build a little tent or a little booth. But again, I mean, there's a clearly articulated point to it. Go through the hassle of this, make it fun, have a good time. Making the booths is supposed to be something enjoyable that you do together, and the burden and the hassle of that is meant to give you a little tiny taste of physical remembrance of what your ancestors went through to get things to where they are now, all under the guidance of God. So this is a central part. This is the celebratory part of the fall rhythm of the ancient Israelites, and I suppose the rhythm even today to an extent. You and I have a rhythm to the fall, and the fall is multifaceted. Wherever you live, whatever it is, there's more than one emotion or aspect of the human experience or the religious experience that is celebrated during that time. It's a dynamic time of year on the calendar. It's a time of year that feels like it sort of goes from life to death or dormancy. And it's a time of year that lends itself toward reflection. In the Northern Hemisphere, it lends itself to more time indoors. I understand because of going to school that in the Southern Hemisphere, this is all kind of flipped. But whatever months of the year where you live represent the move from life toward dormancy, there are things that are going to be associated with that, like looking back and reflecting and appreciating, but also thinking about that dormancy and even death a little bit, and being cooped up and having more time with your thoughts as there's less daylight hours. All of that is going to be part of the rhythm. If you get that, you get what's going on here. But I think the final thing that's really interesting is they had forgotten. There was only a vague cultural recollection, and now their eyes are opened back up to this, and they immediately want to celebrate the thing. So the people went out. This is Nehemiah 8:16. So the people went out and brought back branches and built themselves booths on their own roofs in the courtyards and in the courts of the house of God and in the square by the water gate and the one by the gate of Ephraim, and the whole country that had returned from exile built booths and lived in them. And all of this rediscovery of this aspect of the law is very reminiscent of that great gathering that occurred in the late 600s in the court of Josiah. Whoa, I turned straight to it. That was wild. Reflexively, I was like, and that happened back here in this part of the Bible. Boom, 2 Kings 23. Like, I just grabbed it and turned to it. The Bible's a huge book. I just nailed it. That doesn't happen very often. I just wanted to celebrate that with you. That occurred. It's reminiscent of Josiah renewing the covenant when he rediscovered the book of the law, and it changed his heart. And he was like, whoa, there's things we need to do immediately in response to this. Same deal, spontaneously from the crowd. You're right, Nehemiah. You're right, Ezra. You're right, Levites. This isn't a time for us to grieve and cry and be sad about things. This is the time where, according to the law, we are becoming refamiliarized with, that we should be celebrating, and we should be celebrating very demonstratively by making these fun little huts that remind us of this grand story we're a part of, that God has overseen and guided us through. And so we'll see exactly what they do and how they respond to this rediscovery of this aspect of the law next time around. I mean this next thing very sincerely. I really appreciate that you do this with me. Thank you. It's an absolute joy. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.